this week's spooky Sunday story. At the Bottom of the Bed by John Campbell, based on a true incident from my childhood. At the bottom of the bed. It was the winter of my 11th year, and Christmas was fast approaching. Our cramped council house was even more so now, as the tiny living room echoed to the voices of my eldest brother and his wife of 6 months. We had attended their wedding in midsummer, following a lengthy train ride to Heysham, and thence an overnight journey by ferry across the stormy Irish Sea to Belfast. What an occasion it had been for us all, he in his Sherwood Forester's dress uniform, and her all in bridal white. The only downside for me on the day had been the presence of her 9-year-old nephew, who rattled out indecipherable phrases in lilting sing-song voice. He had, for reasons known only to him, latched himself onto me at first sight, and remained firmly stuck to my side like glue throughout the whole event. My only other abiding memory of him is that for some reason he smelt strongly of malt vinegar, which seemed to exude from his every pore to assail my nostrils mercilessly. But forgive me, I digress. My parents had given up their large bedroom for the duration of the visit by my brother and his wife. Their thoughtfulness led to them taking over the middle bedroom, normally shared by my 2 sisters, who had, in their turn, been shuffled into my room at the top of the stairs, whereupon I had been shuffled into my parents' room at the far end of the house to share the happy couple's bed. Don't ask me to explain. I was 11, for goodness sake. This was a new experience for me, as my parents' room was a place rarely visited by me other than when sneakily searching for hidden Christmas presents a couple of days before, and that had been a disappointingly fruitless exercise. But once more, I digress. Sorry. Their bedroom was in the loneliest part of the house, and that may sound strange, considering how cramped together we were as a household. But in truth, it was the loneliest part of the house, due in the main to the seemingly quirky, but, in hindsight now, probably a well-intentioned architect's design, which had been accepted by the council and subsequently built. To illustrate why it was an odd design, it would probably be a good idea for me to draw a sketch to aid your understanding, but as I don't have a pencil immediately to hand, and as you wouldn't be able to see it anyway, I will attempt to describe the upper half of the house. Altogether, there were 4 bedrooms. Mine, a smallish one, situated immediately to the left at the top of the stairs, and directly facing that of my immediate older brother, who, by the way, bullied me something chronic because he simply enjoyed doing it. He had the smallest bedroom of all, which was situated over the downstairs bathroom, and was always wet through with condensation. Served him right, in my opinion. Again I digress, and offer my sincerest apologies. This writing lark's more complicated than you think, once you get started. My 2 sisters, the one younger, the other older than me, shared the larger bedroom immediately next to mine, with the largest bedroom of all, that of my parents, right at the far end of the landing, and actually forming the upper portion of a separate property, the granny flat next door, occupied by an aged Mrs. Johnson, who frequently watched me warily through the net curtain window whenever I played in the road outside or strayed anywhere near her front gate. She probably didn't think I noticed the slight movements of net across glass as her arthritic fingers tugged it gently aside, but my eyesight was much better then. So it was that on this cold November Sunday night I had made myself thoroughly at home in my parents' bed, and was happily enjoying chewing chunks of Cadbury's Dairy Milk chocolate as I read my Rover and Wizard comic. I was well into The Wolf of Kabul, and Chung The wolf's faithful servant was gleefully cracking heads with his trusty weapon, Clicky-Bar, when it began with a feeling of being watched. I felt the skin on the back of my neck start to tingle. I felt the hairs began to rise. The room grew colder, noticeably colder. I shivered involuntarily. I felt an urge to look up from my comic. I didn't look up. The feeling grew in intensity. I tried to continue reading my comic. I couldn't continue reading my comic. I so wanted to look up, but at the same time I had a deep dread of what I might see at the bottom of the bed if I did. My rapid breathing formed smoky puffs of mist in front of my eyes. The need to look up was overwhelming. I looked up. At the bottom of the bed there stood a silent figure. The figure of an emaciated old woman I did not recognize. She was stooping forward, her withered wrists and gnarled hands protruding root-like from the sleeves of her brightly coloured silken dressing gown. I can see that dressing gown as clearly in my mind's eye today as I did then. The shimmering, vivid hues of reds, golds, greens, blues and silvers of its elegant oriental design standing out in marked contrast to the unattractive hanks of long bleached white hair. Hair that had been roughly stuffed into an off-white lace nightcap, but now trailed out up forehead and ears, framing her wrinkled features as she gazed down at me, her eyes fixed and cold. I dived under the blankets then, burying myself so deeply and wrapping them around me so tightly that she would have needed to use a crowbar to shift me. And then I waited. Long minutes ticked by. Nothing happened. Not a sound. Not a movement. The combined weight of several layers of thick woolen blankets and quilted eiderdown pressed down on me like a grave. I waited. Endless minutes ticked by. Nothing stirred. Not a solitary sound. Not the slightest of movements. I was sweating like a pig when I finally flung the covers off. The cold hit me like a wall of iced water, and I gaspingly sucked in deep breaths of sweet morning-dewed air. The old woman was gone. Nightmares are not the stuff of shared conversation when you are 11 years old. I set off for school early the next morning without a mention of the night's happenings. In truth, I had all but forgotten it when exiting the bus at the top of our road in the greying light of late afternoon. So why do I remember it so clearly to this very day? Well, perhaps it's the image of the small group of nosy neighbours clustered outside Mrs. Johnson's gate. Or perhaps it's the image of Mrs. Johnson's wide-open front door as I approached her gate and paused to see what was happening. It might even be that it was the sight of the tall figure of a uniformed policeman emerging from her granny flat. I could even put it down to my mother's lurid account of how our poor neighbour had been found dead earlier that day by the doctor who had visited her and couldn't get a reply. But in truth, it was none of those things. No. It was the brightly coloured silken dressing gown. The reds, golds, greens, blues and silvers of its elegant oriental design. I briefly glimpsed through the open door.